Hey everyone, I'm Tarini Sood and welcome back to another episode of The Making Of. Our guest for today is a passionate coffee entrepreneur and one of the founding members of the artisanal brand Maverick and Farmer Coffee Roasters. He is head roaster and barista and manages everything from selecting the coffee bean profile, design and aesthetic and all things sensorial for the brand. We welcome Ashish Dabreo. Hi Ashish, welcome. It's so good to have you on the show today.
Hi Tarini, thanks for having me here.
Can you give us a little bit of a background about your brand, Maverick and Farmers, and how you came into existence?
So I've been in the coffee business for quite some time actually. Started out in 2012. We started a brand called the Flying Squirrel way back then when coffee was really not such a big thing in India, really, in a tea drinking nation like India. And say about 2 years ago, I felt that we need to push the boundary when it comes to coffee, become a lot more experimental, become a lot more bold and diverse, and really showcase to the world what Indian coffee is all about and make Indian coffee drinkers proud of the coffee they were drinking. And that's why we started this brand called Maverick and Farmer, which was to completely rewrite the rules because we really understood the rules really well and to completely be experimental and create something very unique in terms of coffee notes.
So I understand that your oldest coffee estate is almost 100 years old. Have your processes evolved over time? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, actually, a slight correction. It's 149 years old, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
one of our oldest plants is that's how old it is. And yeah, obviously, I mean, the learning curve has been really steep in the last, I would say, about 3 to 4 years, when coffee growers are now intensifying what they're doing at the farm level. So for many years, it was the very same simple types of processing. You either do natural processing or you do wash processing. And if you got really bold, then you did something called honey sun-drying, which is very briefly is like the midpoint between the two kinds of processing. But today things have sort of flipped on itself, right? So you have some really interesting, unique experiments that are happening on the farm level, and people are quickly learning off each other. People are looking to India today, finally, after all these years, and saying, "Yeah, these guys are trying something different here. Let's try and see." I've got questions from farmers from different countries actually saying, "How did you actually get to this? How did you get to your smooth coffee? What is the process?" Obviously, I'm not telling right now, but yeah. So the last 3 to 4 years has been massive in terms of the learning curve. It's been pretty steep, and that's how it's changed over the years.
Okay, so I'd like to ask you, what makes Maverick and Farmer different from the other coffee brands in the market?
Well, I think the difference is in the name, and the name sort of explains it, right? So, because we know the rules, we come from a farming background, right? My partner
Right.
Tej, he's been a farmer for 3 decades, right, as of now, and they come from a 3 generation old coffee farming family, right? So all those ground rules are very deeply imbibed. We know the rules by heart. We know what sun does to plants, what water does to the final crop, how you can manipulate things to create better sweetness, better fruit, etc. So all these things, the rules are very steadfast, and we know it. But here's an opportunity to now take those rules and just completely turn it on its head, and that's where the Maverick comes into picture. So it's a combination of two very diverse ways of thinking. One is a farmer who knows those rules and who's really got all that solid experience, which is very difficult to come by.
Yeah.
And then there's a Maverick who understands the rules and completely disrupts it, right? So our coffees are always a balance between the two, and that's where the name Maverick and Farmer. And that's what makes us very different. We have a 140-acre laboratory, which is
Wow.
our coffee farm, right? So it's all out there, and there's so much of sunlight and so much of rain and so much of shade and so many other different kinds of species of plants and animals exist in that farm, and there's so much for us to play with. And I think that really gives us an edge over probably most other coffee brands.
No, so I can hear your passion and your enthusiasm when you're telling me about all of this. Additionally, I'd like to ask, what were the difficulties when you were setting up this business? Because I'm assuming there would have been at least some.
Absolutely. So, number one, we are still primarily a tea drinking country. So,
Right.
and I'm not saying there's something wrong with that, but basically, you're trying to break in and create an understanding and a love and appreciation for coffee. Okay, so that itself is hard ground to break. Number two, with the coffee drinking community, we are an instant coffee drinking community, unfortunately. So, for people to really understand and appreciate the difference between instant coffee, which is just coffee that has been brewed some time ago and freeze dried, and then you just rehydrate it by putting hot water into it. Here we're talking about coffee beans that have life, that has been freshly roasted for our customers on order only, and for them to actually be able to appreciate and understand that yes, it takes a bit of effort in brewing that coffee and bring it to your cup, but there's a
Yeah.
world of difference once you do that. So I think that's been one of our toughest challenges getting to this market.
So I've read about all of your artisanal flavors that you're doing. I hear that you're doing the world's first cold smoked coffee. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and tell me something about the process?
So, cold smoked coffee or old smoky was one such idea that we did last year. Uh, a lot of people love the flavor of smoke in coffee, but
Right.
unfortunately, you have to arrive at that flavor of smoke or that smokiness, that deep smokiness, only when you burn the coffee beans, right? But when you
Okay.
burn the
Yeah.
coffee beans, you're losing out a lot. The sweetness and all those little minute, finer nuances that are there in coffee. So we said, how do we get to that smokiness without losing the essence of coffee, without losing the sweetness and the delicateness of coffee? So therefore, we did this thing called cold smoking, right? And we had this idea and we tried looking up on the web, and there was no reference to it anywhere. And
Right.
so it was something that we created from scratch, where we use a smokehouse that we created on the farm. We stack up a freshly pulped coffee cherries, and we introduce smoke that has been created in another room. So now we expose these coffee cherries, these very delicate coffee cherries. We expose them to the smoke for about 24 to 48 hours, and then it sort of gives it a lovely, mellowy, smoked flavor.
No, so sounds like you're doing so much. I just wanted to ask you now, how do you market your products? You know, in an age like this where everything is so digital, which social media platform would you say you use the most to get in touch with your audiences?
Well, I think obviously Facebook and Instagram, these are the two
Okay.
platforms that work for us, both from targeted advertising as well as basic uh, organic communication with our customers and keeping them informed of what's happening and keeping them engaged in our processes and keeping them interested in our stories all the time. So these two platforms largely have been the one that we are working with. And then, of course, there's our own websites. There's mavericfarmer.com where people go and buy, and we're available on Amazon, we're available on Flipkart, Big Basket, etc.
So I want to ask you now, you would have heard about Maggi India's campaign, which is in collaboration with India Food Network, where Maggi India is actually coming out offering home chefs a chance to start their own food delivery service or online food channel. Now, what do you think about this campaign?
I think it's fabulous. There's a ton of talent in home chefs. I mean, they're the ones who know it best, right? Because they
Yeah.
are cooking for their families, for their loved ones, for their friends, and they have the experience. And there's something about bringing in food from somebody else's home and not necessarily from a very commercialized kitchen that you don't really know the ingredients that are going in there. And if the kitchen owners are not very particular about the oil that they use, or even the sustainability of food, unnecessarily using a lot of imported
Yeah.
ingredients in their food. I think this is really nice that from one home to the other, you're able to now create this platform, and I love it. I mean, I order food from home chefs all the time, and I
Okay.
do too. Yeah.
Now, being a food entrepreneur yourself, what is the one piece of advice that you would have for anyone who's just about starting out in their own career?
A lot of patience, really
Okay.
oodles of patience, because that's what it takes. If you're really passionate about the business and you really want things to go your way and you want the product to come out the way you have envisioned it, then a lot of patience, right? Because people are constantly asking and looking for shortcuts, but that doesn't really work in this. And number two is, I think what has really worked for me is the ground up level, that you start at the floor level. So you get personally involved and engaging in producing, in cleaning. I'm talking from a coffee perspective. So in
Yeah.
roasting and actually working the machine, working as a barista in your own cafes, working as getting into every little thing that one would normally look at. Okay, I'm the entrepreneur, I'm the businessman, so I will hire these people to do these tasks, which
Right.
is fine. But I feel that when you really know the insides of these tasks, you will be able to finally supervise and perform and see that the efficiency is much better. So that's something that has really worked for me, where
Okay.
I love to work ground up. So I get into the basics of things, like even if it's spending time on the plantation, if it's spending time in cafes, in the kitchens, working with the chefs, creating things that you really feel that work for your customers. I think that's something that's very key.
Now, Ashish, very quickly before we wind up for today, I've got 3 quick questions for you. If you can just answer them in whichever word comes to your head first. Yeah?
Okay.
So, out of your own coffees, which is your favorite flavor?
I think Old Smoky now, the cold smoke coffee. Yeah.
What character trait would you say is important for somebody who's starting their own food business or becoming a food entrepreneur? Which is the one character trait?
Passion. I think it also works if you're a shrewd business person, that you run a food business or whatever. But if you look at people who run their business passionately because they themselves are the product and they themselves create these beautiful products, versus someone who's getting into it and done this market study and said, okay, there's a gap here, and therefore I will fit my product into this gap. Both work, right? Both of them really work. One is a very well-informed business person, entrepreneur, who looks at forecasts and looks at budgeting and planning, etc. And the other one is somebody who's just running on heart and passion. For me, I think passion would win.
If you could describe the changes in the Indian food landscape and give me one word by which you can describe the future for it, what would that word be?
Experimental, closer to home. So I think it's so beautiful to see that people are getting experimental, but now with food that is closer to their own culture and their own what they grew up with and what they're more comfortable with. And of course, a dosa is still a dosa, but people are really innovating with it. And there's so many Indian foods that now people are proud of. Initially, it was unless you had a fancy pastry or some unpronounceable foreign term on your plate, you didn't really want to put it on Instagram. But today people are doing it with things that are very close to them, things that are very close to our culture. I think that's where India is headed. People are being more proud of our fabulous culinary heritage, and that's great.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Ashish. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Hari, and likewise.
To all our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in with us this week, and we'll be back again next week with another episode.